A PowerPoint is something that makes you conform to a template. If there is going to be a PowerPoint, I don't think you need a teacher. Anyone with any sense can run through that PowerPoint. All the great teachers I have had in my life have made teaching an interactive experience. That's really the USP. Often, I'm asked to deliver talks here, there. And quite often, people say, can you give us a printout of what you're going to say in advance? Because we want to circulate you. And I hate it. Because if I'm going to give a printout, anyone can read it out. Now what is the link? The link is essentially the following. If you go back and look at our history, everything that we produced was unique. It was unique. If you go to listen to a famous singer, a famous musician, even if it is of the instrumental variety, even if it is the same raga tomorrow, it will be played differently. That's the USP. The USP for India has never been, here is the musical score, and I will faithfully reproduce it tomorrow. We keep saying services are going to be important for India. The essential nature of a service is it has a direct interface between the producer and the consumer for the most part, which means the personal touch is important. The link with your question is, along comes the Industrial Revolution. Along comes, if you see what I mean, Henry Ford and the Model T. Along comes economies of scale. Everything must conform to a certain template. Along comes China, beats us hollow on costs. But that's never been our USP. Our USP has been differentiation. Instead of building on what was our strength, we have been trying to compete on what is our weakness, which is replicating and cloning and reproducing the same thing. Now what I have seen here is what has been our strength, that differentiation. And the answer to your question is, if I go to a doctor, then if I want a prescription, which is a standardized prescription, then I don't want the handwriting to differentiate. But if I want the personalized diagnosis, which I think I do want, most of us want as patients, instead of an anonymous hospital, which is what we are competing on now, then we do not want the machines.
Yeah. Well, I was, as you know, only taking you on in a light way, as your mimics do, and I expected that very eloquent reply, which fortifies the very reason for our raison d'etre and why we have you here to encourage this entire movement. Another small thing on upskilling, if I may call it that. I will take off from another of your brilliant pieces I read today in the Financial Express. I think it appeared earlier. I don't know where you find the time to write so much, by the way, on a cook's wages being more than an engineering diploma holder. I wish, in fact, that the Prime Minister had elaborated on the pakora wala. Because I thought when I heard it, my ears stood out. And I was saying, finally, the pakora wala is going to feature. Because truly, pakora is an art form. You had what we think is a paper thin palak, and it requires great skill for it to be made without cracking up. You know exactly how to wet the leaf, you know exactly how to dip it in batter, and you have to know exactly how much to fry. So there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pakora. So I wish he had expanded it on more, saying how important is the skill of a pakora, and there wouldn't have been people making slight of that remark. Because I think pakora making is extremely important and opens up this entire sector of creative and culture. And you see, certainly the foods, which I forgot to show you, that these women from Gumla, Hazaribagh, and from Guntur are working. So my you know, the question that takes off from the fact that we are being overtaken, that we can't be Luddites, that machine is coming. But should the machine that displaces or devalues the skill of the hand, should it perhaps be regulated? Or how will the future of work ensure very skilled labor?
You see, what you said raises many different issues, and they are all issues that pertain to the labor market. The labor market is not a homogeneous market. So therefore, the relatively more developed country will seek to economize on labor and use more of capital, and therefore use more of capital intensive techniques and use more of machines. Because to some extent a substitution between capital and labor is always possible. So hence, from the developed countries you have all of this talk of artificial intelligence and this, that and the other. Whereas we ought to be more concerned not with artificial intelligence but with human intelligence. If I am talking about labor, I said that the labor market is extremely segmented. But it has the same kind of point that I mentioned earlier. That after all, the price of any skills is determined in the market. And there is a market for that skill. That market is determined either by demand, or it is influenced by supply, or it's a combination of both.
Can't you create the market?
Precisely. Now, if I'm going to go out into the market and say that there is no difference between cook A and cook B, and both of them will produce the identical palak pakora according to this particular template, then the market is not going to differentiate. I don't know about what happens in your house, but in my house, whenever my mother cooked and whenever my wife cooks, if I ask her, how do you combine the masala? I have never seen her measure it out as this cc, that milliliter. That's not the way it works. So the entire question is, how am I going to market that labor? And I remember I said that the labor market is a segmented one. If I am going to market that labor as something that is standardized, then naturally I have to conform to that standardized template, and therefore the book will have to follow that particular template.
But no, the market is not asking for standardization.
No, depends at what level. Depends at what level. You see, cuisine is probably a bad example. But generally in the labor market, the market is asking for standardization because the person who's entering the labor market is incapable of creating that differentiation. That differentiation happens as we move up the ladder. But the trouble is, the day a kid enters kindergarten, we are trying to ensure that the kid conforms to that standardized template. We are trying to ensure that any differentiation is killed. It's part of our education system, it's part of our curriculum, it's part of our examination system. Kill all individuality. In other words, the Industrial Revolution model has entered our teaching as well.
And simplifies Saas Bahurishnas. I meant that only because you put a template of your mother and your wife's cooking. I think certainly you touched the issue on pedagogy and how we need standards, how we need to be able to transmit something that can be an examination or can be graded or can be evaluated in a way that is acceptable. All these terms are to an artist anathema. I find that these are our weaknesses. And I find that when we look at all this becoming inevitable, I keep asking myself this question: who will question these new gods of AI or whatever?
You will and I will. And all of us will. Because some of you may know that I am interested in some of our ancient texts. And in our ancient texts, there was a governance template. And that governance template required very few things to be done by the government. A lot was done by the community, and a lot was done by the individual. Let me give an example to illustrate what I mean. Excuse me. The British were very good at documenting. They documented everything in sight. In the process, they authored these wonderful, wonderful gazetteers, first for all of India and then for individual districts. So here is something from the district gazetteer for Ambala in the year 1883. 1883. What is happening in the year 1883 in the district of Ambala? In the year 1883 in the district of Ambala, a canal has to be built. How much is that canal going to be built? How much is that canal going to cost? An approximating, rounding of the numbers a little bit, roughly 45,000 rupees. In 1883 rupees. Out of that 45,000 rupees, how much was paid by the government? 20,000 rupees. Who paid the remaining 25,000 rupees? The community did. You try and suggest this today, and I'm sure all of you will agree, hell will break loose. Why do we pay taxes? Isn't the government supposed to do this? Well, believe it or not, the tax GDP ratio today is exactly the same as the tax GDP ratio then. The tax GDP ratio today is exactly the same as the tax GDP ratio in Kautilya. The point I'm making is we have become pampered, we have abdicated our responsibility, and we look for everything as something to be delivered by the government. It will not happen. What you're suggesting will not happen if we expect the ministry to do it. It will happen if we collectively do not abdicate our responsibility.
Bibek, this has been our theme song, but in the current kshetra where we work, we can do what we think is extremely important as citizens and do what is required. But to scale up this operation, there isn't resources, and the corporate sector is hugely myopic. And this community that you talk about, has it got a system whereby the deliverables can be so easily communicated or distributed or collected?
You see, as I said, the community did all of those things without any corporate social responsibility being mandated. There was no need, they did it. Who do you think ensured MRP in those days? The government did not. The Srenis, to translate them into English, the guilds did. Delivered skills. The Srenis did. Who ensured there were no unfair trade practices or restrictive business practices. There was no competition commission. The Srenis did.
But your pedagogy has just reduced them to nothing. The pedagogy that we've adopted. And
what has reduced them to nothing is our hoping that the government will do this. I mentioned 1883. This is not thousands of years ago. This is 100 years ago.
So what's the government's role?
The government's role, look, in this particular context, let me backtrack a little bit. There are certain things that are the government's role. The first thing to my mind that is part of the government's role, government means not just union government, because in our three-tier structure, there is a three-tier structure of government. The reason people throughout the world elect governments is for law and order, security and defense. So the first priority to me is law and order, security, defense. If a government has not delivered that, it has failed as a government. After that, there are certain areas where the market or the private sector will not deliver. Those will be rural roads, they will be rural electricity transmission, distribution, there will be primary health centers, there will be schools in villages. Those are the things that the government must deliver first. Because the government has limited monetary resources as well as limited administrative resources. If instead of prioritizing, we do what you're suggesting, that the government should also be doing this, then what will happen is what has happened now 70 years. That the government will not deliver the law and order, it will not deliver justice, it will not deliver the rural roads, it will not deliver the rural electricity. In our day-to-day life, we prioritize all the time.
Why do you have so many mahkamas? Just have 5 ministries. Why have all the other mahkamas?
Now that's a valid question to ask. Why did you ask the question?
I did.
No, you asked me now. In reaction to what I said, how many times are you asking the question outside? because you wanted that ministry. Implicit in your question was that you wanted that ministry.
No, also because I'm not convinced. Because even if you talk about...
Wait, let me finish. I did not finish the first part. So what do we want for a sector that you are interested in from the government? There may be rules, regulations, etc., that are created by governments, which are impeding what I want to do. That also happens. So I want the government to back off. Saying I want to do A, B, C, D, I cannot do this because of this statute, that rule, this, etc., so back up. This, I think government should do, back off. But if you are asking for money on the part of the government, I am saying I think the priority should be those things rather than this, because you cannot have it.
But if there's a limited amount of money,
Precisely.
and if time is against us in terms of even the skills that you're looking at, in a few years from now, there will be more than just languishing, as we have a department looking at languishing skills. They would disappear. And then you have to go back into the idea of reinventing this. Isn't one of the issues that are critical to development is that we create core competencies, and your human resource development is very much a well-endowed department which should perhaps prioritize on where its money is going.
You are not asking the right question.
Please, ask a question for me.
Yes. I said all of us prioritize our household budgets. The question which says, should the government not be funding this, is not the right question. The right question is, should the government be funding this and take that money away from funding the railways? That's the right question. Now, do you think as citizens of the country, we will either agree to proposition 1, which is let the government not build the railways, but fund this instead? Or proposition 2, for this particular thing, am I going to pay as a citizen X% extra as taxes?
Bibek, may I just say,
Of course,
I can see there's a great amount of money being spent already in this sector. If you pick a schoolhouse in a village, I'm coming back to what you think is a prerequisite, is necessary. And if I build a schoolhouse with cement and concrete, or we wait for tenders, and we see how it's all siphoned out, we disempower the people who can make better with bamboo and with with clay, and create magical and more functional forms, then that's money, their money, going through the government for a purpose that's all wrong. I'm talking about the same money, but government's money.
But I agree with you. Contrary to what you think, I'm agreeing with you, but I think that you're not phrasing your question properly. Now, let me explain what I mean. Most of the stuff we want as citizens, the government to do, most of the stuff is not delivered by union government. Except for defense, foreign policy, things like that, international negotiations.
JIYO?
Let's take one question at a time. Let's take one question at a time. It's not delivered by union government. Most things we are interested in as citizens are not delivered by state governments either. Who are they delivered by? They are delivered by local bodies. The water that you want, XYZ that you want, sanitation, sewage treatment, etc., all of those are delivered by local bodies. Now, if you are arguing, as you should be, that, hey, look, this money that has gone, the extra 10%, that the 14th Finance Commission has given to the state governments, are state governments giving that to the local bodies? That's the right question to ask. But you're not asking that question.
No, it's too, I don't understand it also. It's too political for me.
No, it's not political at all. It's not political. It depends on what you mean by political. It is a question that all of us should ask as citizens, because it is in our governance interests. That here is this extra money, the municipal services or the panchayat delivers these, that money is supposed to come from state governments to local governments. So what is happening to the recommendations of the state finance commissions? Now that's the question you should ask. And the moment we as citizens begin to ask the question, then and only then will there be no need for ministries like rural development, because the money will go directly to the local body. However, I repeat what I said, and I am trying to provoke you. In the last 70 years, we do not want that decentralized thing. We have fallen for this trap of that centralized thing, where there is a Mai-Baap Sarkar sitting in Delhi, which will come along and solve all of our problems for us. It won't.
I think that's provocative, and I'm sure there are questions. At a more, because this is what we call the up-close and interpersonal part of the whole day. On a more personal level, Bibek, I want to engage with you on what matters most to you. I don't want you to prioritize. I'm sure you might say all. Aesthetics, functionality, legacy of skills, financial expediency, process or end product. What personally makes the SAP rise? What do you find? I know figures have a great meaning in your life, and statistics are, you can't measure, you can't plan, and that's your strength. But what is it personally that you respond to? This is a session about you also as a person, not about how you perceive governance to be.
You see, sometimes I may choose to duck your questions even if I know the answer. But there are sometimes I will duck your question because I don't know really what the answer is. And this is one of these questions to which I don't think there is a satisfactory answer. I think the answer is also a function of age. What seems to be important when you are young is less important when you are a little bit older. So let me give you my response. And in this entire crowd, most of whom I cannot see because you're sitting there in the dark,
We can't put the
I
lights
can
on.
only think of two people who might agree with me or at least will understand what I am saying. One of them obviously is my wife, and the other one hopefully is Pushpesh. I increasingly becomes irrelevant. Let me go off on a tangent. Sanskrit, a language that I am interested in, is a wonderful, wonderful language. And for those of you who are familiar with Sanskrit, if you know a little bit of Sanskrit, your entire worldview changes. Now what do I mean by that? Strictly speaking, all the nouns in Sanskrit are unimportant. What is important in Sanskrit are the verbs. And the meaning of every noun can be derived from a verb. So this chair, there will be multiple synonyms for a chair in Sanskrit. One of the words for a chair is asanda. Asanda means something that gives me a posture. That is what a chair is. We are sitting under a tree. There are countless number of synonyms for a tree. One of them is padapaha. What does the word padapaha mean? It means something that drinks water with its feet. I gave you these two examples to illustrate that the verb is important. If the verb is important, automatically the noun and the pronoun are pushed into the background. So anyone, maybe it's true of Urdu also, I'm not very sure, anyone who is familiar with Sanskrit and is speaking in English will normally not say, I am Bibek or I am Pushpesh. Will normally say, unless he or she is curbing it because of the Western influence, he or she will normally say, I am known by the name of Pushpesh. They call me Pushpesh. Notice in none of our Indian languages is the word I spelled with a capital letter. It happens in most European languages for sure. We involuntarily say namaste. But think about the word namaste. Namaste is not hello. Namaste is I am bowing down before you. As you progressively get older, it is my submission that sometimes, not always unfortunately, the I becomes less and less important and you realize ahankar is unimportant because you realize that everything is actually being done by someone else.
So language has opened a whole path which is your personal journey.
You see, look, the word Sanskrit, Sanskrita, is actually not a proper name. It's an adjective. The proper name for a very, very long time used to be Bhasha. Till about the 6th century, the word used to be Bhasha, the proper name. And Bhasha is something that one speaks. So the next time someone tells you that the Sanskrit teacher is making you learn mug up grammar tables, you should immediately say that's not how you learn a language. You learn a language which is Bhasha by speaking it, not by mugging grammar tables, but that apart. Sanskrita for a very long time was an adjective. It meant polished language, cleansed language. And notice the word for culture, Sanskriti, has a close affinity with Sanskrita. Because it is my belief that culture, however you choose to define it, can never be dealing from language because the two come together.
True. So, very much say in our language, the handmade, the interpersonal, in terms of our performing arts or whatever we making, doing, and being. I wonder what you think India is leading in this, because it's really not possible to certify what is, for example, handmade in India any longer. We don't know whether khadi is really khadi. We don't know if handloom is really handloom, it's palu. We don't know, we don't have even tell the difference. The pehchan has also shrunk. So, just as you know that Sanskrit can be mugged up and Sanskrit can be felt, there is a huge visual culture. There's a huge repository of dantkasas, of our being, of who we are, that is shriveling up and is changing with fakes, with sense that is no longer discerning. We have raised the issue of pedagogy, and I know some answers which I reject. But so, how do we contend with this? What is real and what is fake? And can government really do anything about it? Because
No,
it tends to support it.
No. These words depend a little bit on the product, and sort of, I'm being a bit legalistic about it. There is a difference between something that is substandard and something that is counterfeit. The two are not the same, but often the two are used synonymously. I think the issue, there are a couple of points that are connected with this issue. The first one is, the moment as a consumer I will want the genuine stuff, whatever it happens to be, I have to pay a higher price. And instantaneously, consumers are not necessarily going to pay a higher price until the consumer, used a different example, I will use a different example, until the consumer recognizes,
Or your
that
GST recognizes that this is
recognizes that the fake and substandard medicine produced in Karol Bagh is not only unlikely to cure me, is also likely to cause damage. The second part is, assuming that as a consumer I am willing to pay a higher price, is there a credible testing, authentication which is credible enough for me to believe it? And obviously, the government does not have the resources to do all of this testing and certification. But increasingly, certainly in food products, much of this testing is done outside the government sector, excuse me, by private parties who are approved by the government. Now, in the particular sector that you are talking about, what I think we will move towards eventually is some credible means of authentication that happens outside the government. It's a little bit like, let me take a completely different example, like organic vegetables.
Yeah.
Are people willing to pay that extra premium for organic vegetables produced in the state of Sikkim now? Yes, they are. Because they believe that what is coming out of Sikkim is organic. Are they necessarily going to pay that price for something where it's disappeared, where it's not picking on it? For something that is produced in Manipur? Not yet, but it will happen.
Yeah, well, there are a few things in my sector where we're talking about either performance or service or produce, handicrafts, where governments look into GST might help. When it's handmade and very labor intensive, it's not quite fair to put them the same taxation as things that are being put up by machines. So there could be some concessions. And they are being considered, in all fairness.
But unfortunately, if you ask me such questions, I will disagree with you, and I don't, the Indian tradition is not to displease the host too much. but look, seriously, look at it like this. What is the objective behind GST?
No, I'm not criticizing.
Hear me out. Hear me out. The objective behind GST is to standardize and harmonize. That's the objective behind GST. If you do not standardize and harmonize, you will have discretion. Sector A will deserve a special rate. Sector B will come along and say, hey, I also deserve a special rate. Sector C will come along and say, I also deserve a special rate, and over a period of time, you will have a very complicated tax structure because you've begun to differentiate. And hang on, I have not finished, Rajiv. So you will have a very complicated tax structure, which also makes the compliance cost very high. It generally tends to enrich the chartered accountants and the lawyers. I don't know how many of you are lawyers here. If you are not, it will no doubt surprise you that because of differences in indirect taxation, the Supreme Court of the country, the highest court of the land, has over a period of time had to adjudicate whether lemons were vegetables, whether coconuts were vegetables, and the coconut judgment led to a split decision in the Supreme Court. So if you begin to differentiate and have subjectivity, this is exactly what happens. It enriches chartered accountants and lawyers and leads to litigation. The GST that we are moving towards is still not a perfect GST. The terminal goal is of a simple GST, a harmonized GST. As an economist, I would want only one rate. One rate does not happen anywhere in the world. So we will probably have 3 rates. But within those 3 rates, if one wants for more differences and special treatment,
That to be the same.
that only messes life up. And I hope somewhere down the line, the GST Council actually says enough is enough.
Okay, well that's news. So really, as a final, in your analysis,
Ask me a question so that I make you smile. You've been frowning continuously.
you have been looking at me all the time, and that's important. No, on the contrary, no, please. What really constitutes real costs, Bibek? The tangible or the intangible? There's a whole lot of there's a lot of give and take. There's a lot of connections. The tangible part of any measurement is something we understand, but the intangible part, which has all kinds of social dimensions, sometimes gets blurred.
See, unfortunately, the moment you're using the word measurement, you're talking about something that can be quantified and reduced to something that is tangible. Anything intangible cannot be measured. That's almost a tautological statement. Sometimes approximations happen. You will say, you will not say, I might say, can you break this in half? And yes, you will break it in half. Anyone who's a mathematician will tell you, you can't do it. You can never get something divided into 2 exactly equal halves. So we have approximations. So therefore, anything intangible must be reduced even in the form of an approximation to something tangible so that I can quantify it and so that I can measure it. This part is fine because that is conceptual. The problem that arises is how do I price that intangible? Because unless in some sense there is a market, I do not know how to price it. It may be an imperfect market, it may not be a very large market, but without that market existing or some reasonable approximation of that market existing, I will never be able to obtain any kind of measurement costs, otherwise it will be 10.
Yeah, my scale is not measurement in terms of figures. Maybe even what you say half, it works as 50%. Maybe I wouldn't even use the word half. I would say, can I share this pakora? So it's neither here nor there. But the idea of sharing is that intangible something that is there in the act of eating a pakora.
Yeah, but you used the word measurement, you did not use the word sharing.
But I didn't use...
You see, the trouble with the word sharing is all of us know this famous story of what was it, two monkeys squabbling over something, and they wanted a cat to come along and adjudicate, and while they were squabbling, the cat ate up the whole thing. This is the trouble with something like...
Okay, so I can't be hogging up the one and only Bibek. I have to at this stage open it to the audience with a big smile. So I'm sure, of course, Push Pastry is here, so I always look to him to open the house. But there are others who I can't see in the darkness, and I wish AHF would light this up too, because it would make life much easier for all of us. So if there are questions that are very difficult to just call him on the Niti Ayog, you're on a more accessible platform. People can speak to you, but having him here in flesh and bones is a privilege, and I open it to the house. There are microphones. And also, if you could just introduce yourself, although you need no introduction, to all the AHF.
I'm Chandrakant Pandav. I work at All India Institute of Medical Sciences. My question is related to the evaporation of community participation. I'm associated with National Nutrition Mission. One important element that is introduced is Jan Andolan. I go back in time to 1883, Ambala. That time you demonstrated about the role of community participation in building the water canal. At what stage and at what activity this practice of community participation has evaporated in the Indian context?
It's a tough question to answer because I gave you the 1883 example because the earliest district gazetteers were from 1883. But I can give you examples of district gazetteers, for example, in Ujjain. Ujjain district gazetteer, this is around the year, I forget the exact year, but this is in the 1920s. And I'm giving you one particular example, I can give you several examples like this. The cows were owned by individual households. The bull was owned by the entire village. So the entire village took turns in maintaining the bull. Let me use modern terms. So the panchayat, therefore the village level panchayat ensured that the bull determined when the bull was going to impregnate which cow. However, you did not want the bull to, what is the right word, to have offspring with its own offspring because that is not very good genetically. So the bull was made to rotate amongst the various villages by what would be the equivalent of the district panchayat. This is 1920s, not 1800s. When did this begin to die? It clearly began to die after 47 and almost certainly after 1951 or perhaps even more certainly after 56 and in the plan periods. Why did it die after that? That would be speculative and it would require a really, really long answer. All I wanted to stress in response to your question is till 1947, we certainly seem to have it.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Pushpeshi, you were, sorry, in the back. Give it to our chartered accountant in the back. Very good. Go on.
Hello sir, my name is Sajal. You talked about three things, the governance, about the government, they are working. First of all, I think security, defense and regulations. What do you think about the role of government in governance? Because without the government, rules and regulations won't exist. So I just want to know, without governance, I mean, government cannot implement the rules in same manner.
What does the word governance mean?
So looking upon whether the rules and regulations are in place or not. Because without the rules and regulations, in fact,
Wait. So for you, the word governance means rules and regulations.
monitoring the rules and regulations. Monitoring the rules and
Do you
regulations.
know? Does it mean only rules and regulations? You see, I dislike responding to questions I do not understand. And one of the expressions I do not understand, despite it being used as a buzzword, is the word governance. Because different people use it in different things. You mean different things? The World Bank has an institute which has a definition of governance according to 6 pillars, out of which rule of law, which subsumes what you mentioned, is only one. So therefore, to respond to that word governance, you have to explain to me what you mean by that term governance. I heard you, now you hear my answer. You have reduced it to rules and regulations. On rules and regulations, there is a whole hierarchy. There are statutes. Within statutes, there are statutes that are passed by union government. There are statutes that are passed by state government. The statutes are an enabling framework under which rules and regulations are issued. Within that umbrella, and I am repeating what I said partly to Rajivji, there are some times when you are saying, does the government need to do this? In the area of law, rules, regulations. And the answer is you don't want the government to do that. So you say, get rid of this. It's a legacy, we no longer want it. On the other hand, there will be areas where you might want to say the government doesn't have any form of regulation as statutes or rules in this particular area. Let's have that. Now, is the response sufficiently clear?
Sir, I'm just talking about basically, for example, the CSR responsibilities of corporates, whether they are fulfilling those responsibilities or not.
No, I don't think you're being clear to all the others. But is your question adding on to Nalwan Singh's about CSR?
Yes, CSR, about CSR. For example, whether the government is tracking, the corporates are fulfilling their responsibilities of CSR, because
I think I already responded to it, but you want an explicit answer. Many of these things enrich chartered accountants and lawyers. I said that earlier. Since you wanted me to make it explicit, I'm making it explicit. But let me add another statement which is an equally important statement. And this is an equally important statement. There are several things, even under that umbrella of governance, and this is the theme I've been harping on, that we should be doing on our own as citizens, communities, as industry. If we do not do it, if we default on what is a constitutional obligation on the part of all citizens of the country, then the government will step in, often in ham-handed fashion. And the courts will also step in. sometimes in less amended fashion. So the fault, dear Brutus, is also in us.
Sorry, Pushpesh, yes, could you pass that back?
Yeah, I think we could have had the running conversation any time.
I can't hear you, Pushpesh. Is something wrong?
But I'm tempted to ask one thing, Bibek. I mean, you are in love with Sanskrit, so am I. But there is a relationship between Sanskrit and Prakrit. And the universe of Sanskrit all over the country was confined to what we now describe as a Indian. So if you go to Tamil Nadu, there will be a pride in a non-Sanskritic civilizational identity which would be outside the Sanskar, Parishkar from Prakrit to Sanskrit. And in the world of Sanskrit, of course, the plays, you would have the women characters talking in Prakrit, and the Sanskrit and Prakrit would coexist. So how would you say, in terms of what interests Rajiv so much, the different cultural traditions which are bargained?
You do not, Rajiv ji, you do not know what you are doing. You have unleashed something that will keep us here, especially me here.
There is dinner.
Just if you go off and have dinner here.
You know, Sanskrit and Prakrit was indicated.
Will have us here for about 1 hour. So let me respond in very bulleted fashion. And this is something on which I hope you will have a more provocative conversation between you and me, where you can be the moderator. Not that it is very easy to moderate this topic. I have several responses. Response number 1. Let me see how I should put it politely. In Tamil Nadu, I am sure, there was a conscious attempt, I'm sure you know, there was a conscious attempt to purge it of all Sanskrit influences. So let us look at the state of Tamil literature before this conscious attempt was made to cleanse it about 200 years ago. Secondly,
You mean Sangam? You're talking 200 years back about
I will not expand on those statements. Second, who was the most important Bhashyaka of Panini? Patanjali. Where was Patanjali born? In what is Tamil Nadu? Thirdly, because he mentioned women talking in Prakrit, I can say several things in response. I will say only this much. Who watched those plays? Ordinary people also watch those plays? They did. So therefore the ordinary people also understood Sanskrit. And remember what I said earlier, Sanskrit was the polished form of the language. And there is a hilarious anecdote, a story, which is from Patanjali, which you can look up, where this kind of conversation happens between a grammarian and a charioteer. Shaking his head, he knows this. So the grammarian says something to the charioteer. The grammarian is supposed to know Sanskrit. And the charioteer is having fun at the grammarian's expense and is correcting his Sanskrit. So this artificial divide is not a divide, I think, that really existed. Some people spoke King's English. A lot of people did not. That does not mean that people did not speak English. There is English and there is King's English.
Margi Deshi, this paramparas were like constantly flowing together. You know, Margi Deshi, the same outfield, we constantly seeing this parallel, sometimes converging, sometimes separating, sometimes reinforcing each other. But Are there others? Yes, there in the back. Who's that? I can't, is it not possible to put some hall lights or whatever, our car park lights? This is actually the car park, as you all may guess. This is the.
Sir, I'll be making 2 points. The first one is to thank you for throwing light on this one simple fact that our the government structure is on 3 levels. Since ideally, as in general, we would always think that it's central and state, but you brought out light that, you know, what you really need and what
I must protest. I must protest.
No, what I'm saying is that...
No, I heard what you said. Even before you proceed further, I will protest. Raising my hands. Why am I protesting? Reflective of everything that Rajiv ji has been saying. Why did you use the word center?
Union.
No. Yes. Is the word center there in the Constitution? No.
Okay.
The word in the Constitution is union. It is very important to use the word union because then we will appreciate, we want that decentralization. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and it's just a play of words for me for now, but I will be sure to use the word union from now on. What I was saying was, throughout we've always been taught that it's union as in central and state government. And we always used to think, okay, so how do I affect all of this as a citizen? And we think that, oh, so the only way to do it is either work for the CM or work for the PM or in any other industry. We never thought that, you know, the person who's actually accessible to us is our local MLA who is a part of that local body. So this is one of the big takeaways I have from today.
And the DM that alliterates better with PM and CM.
Yeah, and the district magistrate, for sure. Yeah, so this was a takeaway and I really wanted to bring that out. The other question was, you were talking about standardization in education and Rajiv has been talking about standardization in production where, you know, machines have come in, etc. I found that standardization helps us to ascertain a value on a product or an output. Even with education, with my certain degrees, you will be able to put a value in terms of what salary you want to pay to me. In terms of even food, there is you know, number of calories in it or the weightage, the grams of it. With that, you're able to somewhere associate a value, a per unit value. But with craft and this intangible, how am I able to gauge a value of a product? So, and the question is to both of you.
No, you see, the second one is more like a statement which I completely agree. Where I'm probably disagreeing with you is in the first part. There is a certain minimum threshold. For that certain minimum threshold, I want that standardization. Above that, even for education, I do not want that standardization. Let me personalize it and illustrate it like that. And no aspersions, actually aspersions of the younger generation. If I recruit who's 40 or 45 years old, the person will be able to write a sentence coherently in English, and I'm not speaking about English, also in the vernacular. Because the school leaving system, the examination had an essay. So people were used to writing. Today, if it is the younger generation, the school leaving exam is multiple choice, standardized format, and I have no means of differentiating between the candidates. I cannot distinguish chalk from cheese. And therefore, all that happens is, ideally what do I want? I want the person who has greater value to be paid more, the person who has less value to be paid less. But the moment I'm doing standardization, I'm averaging out. It's like you catching hold of me, putting one of my feet inside a fridge and the other one inside an oven. On an average, I will be very comfortable. In exactly the same way, I'm averaging out. So the grain is getting more than is getting less than what the grain should get, but the chaff is getting more than what the chaff should get. So therefore, the education system I think actually needs to get away from standardization beyond that minimum threshold.
I think we've come to the end of our
I've earned my dinner.
and Pushpesh, she will were more than amply satisfied. Today's theme, if I may, yes, please.
Is it okay if I ask a question?
Please,
Yes.
okay.
Hi. My name is Kipton. I work at AGF. So I have a question. So you mentioned that it's
You've just
important.
given a new name to the Asian Heritage Foundation.
Oh,
You work in Asia. Nice.
Sorry.
Nice.
So you mentioned that it's important to prioritize in regards to defense, security, governance. So you mentioned that it's important to prioritize defense, security, governance. So my question is, can we see the different facets of the creative and cultural industries as not just something to for the government to support or coddle, but something to use as a soft power, a monetizing strength? The same model countries like Japan, Korea, UK, they're using in the form of Cool Japan, Cool Britannia. So isn't it prudent then to focus on this?
Very easy question, because the first question where I can outright say yes or no, and in this case, obviously, I'm going to say yes. And I think it's actually happening. It's happening gradually. So abroad, 15 years ago, Indian restaurant. Today, that Indian restaurant has been overtaken by Bihari restaurant, Andhra restaurant, X restaurant, Y restaurant. So I think over a period of time, it is gradually happening. But this is not something that can be pushed by government alone. Government has a role. But I think the reason it is happening is because this is one particular area where in different ways all of us are pushing soft power. And in a sense we have always known about soft power, because soft power existed in Chanakya much before someone from the West discovered that expression. The trouble is, we rediscover several of the things that are in our past only when they are recycled towards us via the West. So completely agree with you.
So my following up on that, so can there be a government initiative which sort of brings in all of these facets together to actually make it more stronger?
I'm hesitating whether I should say what I'm about to say. But let me go ahead and say that, since this is the last question. You have more faith in the efficiency of the government than I do.
Well, I could end that more suitably. So we have much greater faith in you than many other entities. Thank you very, very much for this enlightening evening. Thank you for spending the time you did. I have worked closely with people in the Niti Aayog and in its earlier incarnations. I've never been political, never would be. As an artist, I related to planners, to government. As a Democrat, I have to. And there is a great sense of comfort, really, and I mean this with an inner smile that you do not perhaps see, that there is someone like you that we can turn to and talk about the finer things that have determined all our lives, and I hope the rest of our lives. Thank you, Bibek. Thank you ever so much.
black. You can divide these two.